Welcome back, everyone. Today we're discussing a topic that's both legally essential and culturally vital: diversity in the workplace. This module is particularly important because diversity touches every aspect of HR, from recruitment and selection to retention and promotion. It's not just about following the law, it's about creating organizations where everyone can contribute their best. We'll cover 5 main areas: legislation, equal employment opportunity, compliance, the benefits and challenges of diversity, how to promote diversity, and the current trends. So, by the end of this session, you should be able to accomplish these 5 things. Firstly, we'll be summarize the legislation regarding employment discrimination, discuss the EEO, compliance, best practices, and enforcement, the benefits and challenges of a diverse workplace, how to promote diversity within your organization, and the current trends in diversity. These outcomes build towards a comprehensive understanding of diversity as both a legal requirement and a strategic advantage. So, let's tackle legislation first. This is the legal framework, and we have 6 learning objectives for this section. First, it's going to be the laws designed to prevent bias and discrimination in hiring. Second, summarize the protections provided in Title VII of the Civil Act of 1964. Then we're going to summarize the protections provided in the Civil Rights Act of 1991. We're going to identify additional laws and executive orders regarding discrimination, summarize key Supreme Court cases regarding discrimination, and then discuss changing interpretations of legal protections of diversity. Understanding this legal framework is essential for any HR professional. So, let's look at the 9 categories protected under federal law. Federal law protects individuals in these 9 categories, and these are characteristics that cannot be used as the basis for employment decisions. So we look at age. It's protected under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, covering workers 40 and older. Disability, they are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, covering physical and mental impairments. Genetic information, protected under GINA, preventing discrimination based on genetic testing or family medical history. National origin, where someone comes from or their ancestry. Pregnancy, it's protected under the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. Race, one of the original protected categories. Color, another original category, protecting against discrimination based on skin color. Religion, it protects religious beliefs and practices. And then we have gender, which is protecting against discrimination based practices based on gender. These categories form the foundation of federal anti-discrimination law. So, let's look at the EEOC. It was established by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's the primary agency responsible for enforcing protections against employment discrimination. The EEOC's jurisdiction has been expanded over time to include several important laws. Those are the most important ones: the APA, the ADEA, Section 501 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Titles 1 and 5 of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, Title 2 of the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008. In 1972, the Congress expanded the Title VII to protect federal government employees and granted the EEOC authority to pursue independent litigation against private employers. So think of the EEOC as the enforcement arm. It's the agency that investigates complaints and takes action against employers who violate the law. Right. Let's move on now to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It is perhaps the most important piece of employment discrimination legislation ever passed. It was proposed by the famous President John F. Kennedy and signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson. This landmark legislation protects individuals against unemployment discrimination based on the 9 protected categories that we just covered. So, bona fide occupational qualifications, BFOQ. There is one important exception to the Title 7 protections, and this is the bona fide occupational qualifications. A BFOQ means that a particular religion, sex, national origin, or age must be an actual requirement for performing the job. The requirement must be necessary to be normal operation of the employer's business. So some examples of this is a Jewish center can refuse employment to a Catholic individual for a role funded by the congregation because religious affiliation is essential. A movie director can demand African American actors for a film about slavery because the racial authenticity is essential in the production. And a male fitness instructor can be refused employment at an all-females gym because gender is essential to the role. BFOQs are interpreted narrowly by courts. Employers cannot simply claim a BFOQ without a strong justification. So, as much as it is implemented, it's protected. So, let's move on to our first practice question. There are a variety of acts in discrimination law. Which of these people are protected by which laws? So, a female employee in an office being paid less than a male employee, reasonable accommodations for an employee in a wheelchair, and an employee who is genetically predisposed to cancer, an employee who claims he suffered retaliation for lodging a discrimination complaint. So, take a moment and think about this and match it to the choices. Okay, so when it comes to the first one, it would be Equal Pay Act. The second one would fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The third one would be under GINA. And the last one, while it's not explicitly listed in the question, it would fall under the Title 7 protections. So, the female employee who's paid less is covered by the EPA. The wheelchair user needing accommodations is covered by the ADA. The genetic predisposition is covered by GINA. Retaliation is generally covered under Title 7, demonstrating that employees who complain about discrimination are protected from retaliation. So it basically gives you the right to complain and air your views without having any fear of being punished. Now let's go over some important Supreme Court cases. The first one being the Phillips versus Martin Marietta Corp. The court ruled that employers cannot discriminate on the basis of gender plus other factors. So in the specific case, the employer refused to hire women with school-age children while hiring men with similar circumstances. This was found to be discrimination. The next one, Griggs versus Duke Power Co. It's a landmark case in establishing that employers must justify neutral rules or tests by demonstrating business need. Duke Power required a high school diploma for certain jobs, which is disproportionately excluded African Americans. The court found that this was discriminatory unless the company could prove the diploma was truly necessary. Then we have Espinoza versus Farah. The court ruled that non-citizens are entitled to Title 7 protections. Employers cannot discriminate based on citizen status. Then we have the Alexander versus Gardner Denver Co. The court ruled that discrimination claims submitted to arbitration can still be heard in court. You can't just sign away your right to be sued. No such thing as an out-of-court settlement. Then we have the UAW versus Johnson Controlled. The court ruled that preventing women from working certain dangerous jobs that are harmful to their fetuses constitutes sex discrimination. Employers cannot exclude women from jobs based on potential pregnancy risks. Then we have the On-Cale versus Sundowner Offshore Services. The court ruled that same-sex sexual harassment is actionable under Title VII. Harassment doesn't have to involve the opposite sex to be illegal. So these cases illustrate how courts have interpreted and expanded protections over time. So let's move on to a class discussion. Based on what we've covered now about the Civil Rights Act and Supreme Court decisions, consider these questions. How have court interpretations of discrimination law changed over time? And what do these cases reveal about the evolving understanding of workplace fairness? I want you to think about this and think about how a case decided in 1971 might be decided differently today. You can drop your answer in the comments. I'll have a look at that. Now let's move on to our practice question. You are preparing a briefing on discrimination law for new managers and supervisors. You want to start a big picture view. Which of the following would best serve that purpose? I'm going to give you a few seconds to read the options and choose the correct answer. So the correct answer would be C. Discrimination protections legislation is applicable to all employment decisions. Discrimination can occur at any stage of employment: hiring, promotion, compensation, discipline, termination, and everything in between. A is incorrect because these are legal requirements, not suggestions. B is incorrect because protections cover all employment decisions, not just hiring. D is incorrect because there are 9 protected categories, not 5. Okay, and let's move on to another one. You are preparing a briefing on the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Which of the following best summarizes the protections in the original act? I'm going to give you a few seconds and you can lock in your answer and I'll reveal the correct answer. Okay, so the correct answer is D. Title VII prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. The original act included these 5 categories. This is exactly what the law says. So option A misses color and national origin, while B misses religion. C describes the Civil Rights Act of 1991 and not the original 1964 Act. Okay. Let's move on to another question. Let's look at the 1991 Act. Which of the following best summarizes the protections provided in the 1991 version of the Civil Rights Act? So I'm going to give you a few seconds to read through those and figure out what the correct answer is. Okay, so the correct answer is B. The 1991 Act established the ability to file suit and receive compensatory and punitive damage awards in intentional discrimination cases. So A is incorrect because gender identity and sexual orientation were not added until later. C is incorrect because the protections apply broadly. D is incorrect because the burden of proof has generally been on employers to justify their decisions when discrimination is alleged. Okay, so it's pretty simple. You just got to read them and be very meticulous about the actual fine print, as should I call it. And that's basically how law works. There are very specific phrases that you have to look for. So now let's move on to equal employment opportunity. This is how they are implemented. We have 3 learning objectives for this section, and first we're going to discuss the EEO compliance best practices, what organizations should be doing. We're going to explain the process for filing an EEO complaint and how complaints are pursued. Then we're going to identify the impacts of EEO violations. Basically, what happens when organizations get it wrong, how they get into trouble. So this section bridges the gap between legal requirements and practical action. So let's look at the EEO best practices. Training, enforcement, and accountability. This is to ensure everyone understands their responsibilities and hold people accountable for their violations. Promoting an inclusive culture. This goes beyond compliance to creating an environment where everyone belongs. Then you got to develop communication and dispute resolution capabilities. You have to, in this sense, give employees channels to raise their concerns and resolve issues before they escalate. You have to then establish a neutral and objective criteria. So you have to ensure that hiring, promotion, and evaluation decisions are based on job relevant factors and not personal characteristics. Then you got to evaluate the practices. You have to regularly review HR processes to identify any potential bias. And then you audit the selection criteria. You have to examine the requirements used for hiring and promotion to ensure that they're truly necessary. Then you got to recruit, hire, and promote employees with EEO principles in mind. You have to make sure that diversity is a deliberate goal and not an afterthought. And while doing that, you got to develop employees with an EEO in mind. You have to ensure that all employees have access to development opportunities. Then you got to establish, communicate, and enforce an anti-harassment policy. This is essential for preventing hostile work environments. These practices create a foundation for both legal compliance and organizational effectiveness. So, let's move on to filing a complaint. And let's understand how the complaint process works. So who can file this complaint? Anyone who has been discriminated against and feels that they have the need to file a discrimination complaint based on probable cause. So how is it filed? It's filed using the agency's public portal to submit. The complainant, then participates in a fact-finding interview and completes the filing of the charge. So, when must this be filed? No more than 180 days from the date of the incident. If there is a state law prohibiting age discrimination and a state agency authorized to enforce the law, the deadline would then extend to 300 days. The complaint process is structured to give people a clear path to raise concerns while giving employers a fair opportunity to respond. So, let's move on to the complaint process. First thing you're going to have to do is the claim assessment. The EEOC reviews the complaint to determine if it has any merit. Then you move on to the claim notice. The employer is notified of the complaint. Then you move on to mediation. The parties may attempt to resolve the issue through mediation, and then there's an investigation where the EEOC investigates the claim. Then you have the EEOC decision. They determine whether there's a reasonable cause to believe discrimination occurred, and then there's the right to sue. So if the complaint isn't resolved, the complainant receives a right to sue letter and can pursue a case in court. So here's a little fun statistic. In 2018, the EEOC settled 90,558 cases for a total of $500 million in settlements. So these numbers show that discrimination claims are taken very seriously and can be costly for employers. So let's move on to some practice questions. Let's check your understanding of the EEO best practices. So you're developing an anti-harassment policy for your organization based on your reading of the EEOC's E-Race initiative. You decide to do which of the following. I'm going to give you a moment to read the answers and figure out which one's the correct one. Okay, so the correct answer is D. You gotta establish, communicate, and enforce a clear anti-harassment policy. A is incorrect because anti-harassment policy should cover all protected categories and not just race. B is not enough, just adding a paragraph isn't sufficient. And C is a useful practice but not the complete answer. And D captures the full range of actions needed. So it's pretty simple. You just have to establish, communicate, and enforce all three in one. Okay, so let's move on to another question. A friend of yours is a small business owner who prefers to hire people like me. Which one of the following best conveyed the impacts of EEO violations? I'm going to give you a moment to read the options and choose the correct answer, and then we'll go over the correct answer and the correct options. Okay, so the correct answer is B. Workplace discrimination can result in significant legal, operating, brand, and human costs. A is factually incorrect and legally dangerous. C is incorrect because there are no claim filing fees for complainants. And D is incorrect because the EEOC accepts claims from all sizes of businesses. B covers all the bases: legal costs, operational disruption, brand damage, and human impact. So let's analyze this answer again. B, it covers all the bases. It can result in significant legal, operating, brand, and human costs. It's basically everything that violates the EEO. So it's pretty simple to understand when you actually have a good understanding of the actual act, and then it will help you identify all violations and even adherence. So moving on, working with the diverse workforce. Now, beyond legal compliance to the broader question of what diversity and inclusion actually means for the organization, we're going to have 3 learning objectives in this section. We're going to compare diversity and inclusion. We're going to understand the difference between these two related but very distinct concepts. Then we're going to discuss the benefits of a diverse workforce. This is why organizations should care. And then the challenges, which are the difficulties that come with diversity. You need to understand both benefits and challenges to have a realistic picture and an understanding of how diversity actually works in the organization's workforce. So, let's start with diversity and inclusion. Joe Kirstand, a diversity consultant, invented this term, and I'm going to go more in detail. It says diversity means difference. So what do we understand by this? It's about the presence of differences in a group, different backgrounds, perspectives, experiences, and characteristics. If you have to look at your workforce, or even if you have to look at your classroom, there are probably people of different ages, different races, different genders, different nationalities. They've experienced life differently, and this is what makes diversity. And then moving to the next concept of inclusion, he says means our ability to include difference. So this is about whether diverse people are welcome, valued, and able to participate completely, including them. So this distinction is very important, because you can have diversity without inclusion. A diverse workforce where some groups feel excluded or undervalued, if that makes any sense. You can have it, but you cannot incorporate inclusion. So with this being said, we can understand that you cannot have true inclusion without diversity. So these are intertwined concepts. They need one another to actually work. They need to complement each other. So here's a very crude example. Imagine having a variety of ingredients, but you are not mixing them properly. That is diversity without inclusion. The goal is to bring people together so that these differences become strengths. So moving forward, these are the benefits of diversity. And they are pretty simple, but they also get a little bit more complex. So let's start with the simple ones. You have something known as greater creativity and innovation. So that's very obvious. When you have people from different ages, different races, different backgrounds, there are different perspectives that lead to new ideas. And then after that, you have improved competitive positioning. So if you have a diverse workforce, people from different backgrounds, you're going to have a better general understanding of what a diverse population wants. It helps you understand diverse markets and be able to actually provide for different kinds of people. Then you have an improved marketing effectiveness. So people from different backgrounds are going to see that you are incorporating a diverse workforce, and you are going to be representing diverse customers. And then you have improved talent acquisition and retention. So creating this holistic environment is going to make people want to work where they belong. And then increased organizational adaptability. So diverse teams respond better to change. And then obviously greater productivity. Diverse teams tend to outperform homogeneous ones. Then you have greater personal and professional growth. So that occurs because you are learning from different perspectives. If you're in a workforce where there are people who are older than you, you're going to learn from their experiences. When there are people who are younger than you, you are going to learn about more modern experiences, and they're going to be able to help you understand, like in their social circles, in their youth, what their perspective is, and actually how to communicate and better understand that category of people. So these benefits make diversity a strategic imperative, not just a legal requirement. So now let's move on to the challenges. So complexity. It requires ongoing effort and attention. It's not something that you just attend to one day and forget about the next. It's an everyday ongoing process. Now, differences in communication behaviors. So people from different cultures and backgrounds and ages communicate differently. You need to factor that into consideration. A very crude example is you wouldn't talk to your mom or dad the same way you would talk to a youngster or your peer. You wouldn't talk to your granny or your grandfather the way you would talk to your friend. And then you have prejudice or negative stereotypes. So bias exists and it needs to be actively addressed. Then you have a difference in language and non-verbal communication. So what's polite in one culture may be rude in another. And I can really advocate for this because I have been in multiple social settings with people from different backgrounds, and a very crude example I can give you is when a teacher walks into a classroom, A lot of the times you are required to stand up to show respect, while in other cultures you are required to sit down and bow your head in respect. So that's a very nice example to understand nonverbal communication. Then you have differences in professional etiquette. So different cultures have different expectations about workplace behavior. So you have collective cultures and you have power distance cultures. Collective cultures will value team-based orientation, while power distance will want individual decision making and individual contributions. So these challenges don't mean diversity isn't worth pursuing. It means that we need to be thoughtful and intentional about how we create diverse, inclusive workplaces. So now, what going over what we discussed now, let's move on to this question. A member of your staff asks you to clarify the terms diversity and inclusion. Which of the following is the best response? So I'm going to give you a second to actually read through that and choose what you think is the correct answer. And then after that, we're going to go over each of the options and which one is the correct answer and which one is the incorrect answer. Which three are the incorrect answers? So the correct answer is C. Diversity means difference and inclusion and refers to our ability to include difference. A is incorrect because they're related but distinct concepts. B mixes up the levels, and D is just clearly wrong. That doesn't make sense at all. So diversity is about who's in the room, and inclusion is about whether everyone's voice is heard and valued. So moving on to the next question. A member of your staff asks you to clarify the terms diversity and inclusion. Oh, sorry, I'm going to question 8. Oh, my bad. So here's question 8. So you're preparing a why it matters diversity briefing for managers and want to highlight key benefits. Which of the following points should you emphasize? I'm going to give you a moment to read all the options and you can choose which one's correct. We'll go over the correct answer and why the others are incorrect. So the correct answer is A. Diversity drives business performance. B is incorrect because diversity matters across all positions. C is incorrect because it's not just about perception. D is incorrect because multiple dimensions of diversity improve business results. A is the overarching point. Diversity isn't just nice to have, it's good for business. Right, so let's move on to question 9. You'll be discussing the benefits of diversity with a manager and you want to set realistic expectations. Which of the following points is a challenge you should convey? Okay, so the correct answer is A. There is a potential for conflict based on conscious or unconscious bias. B is incorrect because while there are many challenges, performance typically improves. C is incorrect because nonverbal communication varies across cultures. And D is an unrealistic expectation. A acknowledges the real challenges without suggesting that diversity isn't worth pursuing. So let's move on now to promoting a diverse workforce. We're going to look at how organizations can actively promote diversity and inclusion. And we have two objectives for this section. We're going to first discuss what works in terms of developing a diverse workforce, and then we're going to identify the best practices for achieving workforce diversity. This is the practical application, what organizations actually do to create more inclusive workplaces. So, unconscious bias. Let's talk about this. It's not something that's intentionally done, but a subtle preference that affects our decisions without realizing it. So, blind auditions. So, when orchestras started using blind auditions where musicians perform behind screens, the number of women hired increased by more than 50%. So, this just shows how removing visible characteristics can reduce bias. De-biasing job descriptions, eliminating words like aggressive and replacing them with more gender-neutral terms like assertive can attract more diverse applicants. The use of AI. Artificial intelligence can complement human capabilities by flagging potential biased decisions. However, AI itself can be biased if trained on biased data. So that is known as algorithmic bias. Now, a very famous case that I once read of this, and I'm not going to mention the company, but what they had did was they had incorporated an AI recruitment and selection tool. Now, the recruitment and selection tool was based on previous historical decisions. Now, those historical decisions did have some bias actions in them, and by designing the AI on this, you are creating algorithmic bias because the AI is basically learning discriminatory behavior and implementing it. So that's something that you have to be very careful of. And then after that, you have training. Goal setting and perspective taking training can help people become more aware of their biases and develop strategies to overcome them. So you mustn't directly tell a person do this or do that, because that is being biased. You need to focus on their strengths and weaknesses. So it isn't about just being a bad person, it's about having preferences you might not even recognize. The key is to build systems that reduce the impact of bias. So let's move on to the best practices for promoting diversity. The first one, having diverse leaders signals that diversity matters and provides role models. Then the second one, make sure policies don't disadvantage certain groups. Inclusive behavior, model inclusive behavior at all levels. The next one, everyone should feel they belong in that workplace. They shouldn't feel alienated. Then, leaders must understand and care about diverse experiences. A top-down approach isn't enough. Diversity and inclusion must be embedded throughout the organization. Right. Numbers don't alone create inclusion. It takes consistent practice and create a positive environment. Maximize joy and connection, minimize fear. Right. Forget fit and focus on helping individuals thrive. So instead of asking if someone fits in the culture, ask how the culture can support them. And then lastly, consider your brand. Your reputation affects who wants to join you. These practices take work, but they're essential for creating true inclusive organizations. So let's move on to our practice question. You are conducting research to determine how best to use the HR budget dollars dedicated to diversity initiatives. Based on your research, you decide to, I'm going to let you read the potential answers and I'm going to give you the correct answer and why the others are wrong. So the correct answer is C. You have to evaluate and redesign current practices and training programs. So Why is A incorrect? One-time training is not sufficient. B is very unrealistic and doesn't address the human bias in systems, like I mentioned, algorithmic bias. And D is too narrow. Perspective taking is valuable but shouldn't be the only approach. And why C is correct is because it reflects a comprehensive approach that addresses processes and not just individual attitudes. So it's pretty simple in this sense over here. You have to look at what is the most correct and inclusive option, if that makes any sense. That is how I would approach it. So let's look at some current diversity related trends. So let's discuss two key trends that are shaping diversity in the workplace. Role of allies. These are people who advocate for groups they don't belong to. Allies speak up against discrimination when they see it and use their privilege to support others. So think of them as the diversity champion. Then you have the role of artificial intelligence. AI is increasingly used in recruitment and HR processes. It can help reduce bias, but can also perpetuate bias if not carefully designed. I went over that with the recruitment and selection AI tool. So these trends represent both opportunities and challenges for diversity inclusion. So let's look at practice question 11. You've identified allies as one of the two key diversity related trends to watch. Which of the following is a point worth discussing with your management team? I'm going to give you a moment to read the options, and then I'm going to tell you the correct answer and why the others are incorrect. So the correct answer is D. Research suggests that those who consider themselves allies don't feel empowered or know what to do. This is an important insight for management. Many employees today want to be allies but don't know how. Organizations need to provide guidance and support for ally behavior. So they need to actually implement training and development for this, and also have some ongoing human oversight pertaining to this. So A and B reflect outdated or inaccurate views. C is just wishful thinking and it's not supported by any research. D highlights an opportunity for organizations to help employees become effective allies. So let's just look over the concepts we discussed today. So the first one being the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and Title VII of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This is the foundation of federal anti-discrimination law. Then you have the federal laws that protect individuals in 9 different categories. If you don't remember, the categories were age, disability, genetic information, national origin, pregnancy, race, color, religion, and gender. Right. And then we learned that there's more to diversity and inclusion than just following the law. Compliance is the minimum, not the goal. True diversity and inclusion requires active, ongoing effort. Having a diverse workforce can cause friction between individuals who don't understand each other, but our differences create more strength when we work together effectively. Then we have cultivating a diverse workforce, which takes deliberate work and focus. It just doesn't happen by accident or by chance. Allies should speak up against discrimination when they see it. This is how we create cultures of inclusion. So these concepts are essential for any HR professional and for anyone who wants to build a better organization. So that brings us to the end of Module 4. We summarize the key takeaways, and looking ahead, I look forward to exploring recruitment and selection and how organizations can choose the right people. So if there's any questions for today's lesson, please let me know, and thank you for your attention and participation. I'll see you in the next one.